Let's talk about a problem that's a bit mysterious in the world of architecture, and that is performance and triangle counts, or face counts, if you will. So the issue starts in Revit, and back in the day, probably the biggest culprit was Revit City. Nowadays, it's probably the manufacturers who are creating the worst, overly complicated families. And it's kind of this misguided philosophy. You could call it the SketchUp philosophy, right? The more I model, the better my Revit model is going to be. I need to model the little keyhole for my doors. I need to model everything. People are going to be so impressed when they see my detailed models. Oh my God. The problem is there's potentially 30 people working on this model, and they don't all have $5,000 computers, and they don't need to see the keyhole in your door. So this invisible aspect of geometry is misunderstood, and one of the main reasons is that there's zero visibility inside of Revit. Nobody's going to tell you how many triangle your door, your furniture has, how many triangle the family of your manufacturer has when they bring it in, and most importantly, what the impact on everybody's performance is going to be from those bad decisions. So when you bring a Revit family into your project, you may want to consider remodeling it completely, or at least removing some overly useless detail from the model so that it helps performance. And if we think long-term, the client's going to want to access the model on their tablet. They're going to want to share the model online on the web. So having these little hinges and ridiculous little detail that bring no value to the model is something that you want to identify and clean as soon as possible. It's really going to help the entire team work faster, and it's also going to help the owner use the model for facility maintenance, share the model to people who have tablets or cell phones or, regular computers basically. So if you use VIM, you can of course bring in the data into Power BI and then do an analysis that will show you the worst families in your project and what percentage of the triangles they're responsible for, how many triangles they're responsible for. And then you can go in and simplify these families or even replace them potentially. And this is all great, but using Power BI kind of requires an infrastructure and a bit of a system in place so that you can look at all the projects in your office and analyze them and compare them and track them and so forth. What I want to introduce today is our new basically desktop viewer. And our desktop viewer, which is called VIM Flex, comes with a couple of workflows, including the mesh audit. So the mesh audit gives you the same capabilities that we just saw in Power BI, but it basically exports the file from Revit, and then you have access right away to all of the data to see where all of the problems lie. So here, if we browse, we see the same data that we had in Power BI. We see that these particular benches are overmodeled. They're about 7,000 triangles each. Because there's 385 of them, it makes a lot of sense to go in and simplify this manufacturer family, which is basically overcomplicated CAD import. And we can go down the list and just see what is responsible for the heavy parts of our model if we're going to bring this down. Some things like pipe, there's nothing you can do, right? A pipe is a pipe is a pipe. But when you load in a family from the internet or you create your own family, well, you have full control over that family and its geometry. When you have a lot of geometry, you really have to wonder, why am I doing the model, right? What's the purpose of this geometry? Well, it's to detect clashes. It's to know whether it's a toaster or a computer. So you do need a minimal amount of detail or a minimal shape. And if you're really doing a rendering model, I suggest just using the level of details inherent in Revit that you can have coarse, medium, and fine, all living together. Or you can even create a second set of families and put those on a rendering work set that is off by default, except for your render views. So if you want to use VIM Flex today, it's pretty simple. Basically, it's going to install a Vim exporter inside of Revit where you can export your Vim files. To get started, just go on our website, click the download button, and here you'll download the desktop installer with Flex, as well as the trial, which will give you free access to the reports until March 2nd. So the Vim viewer is always free, and we really look forward to your feedback on this product. Let us know what you think. I think this is really going to help you out, especially if you're doing any kind of VR, AR, mobile development with your Revit project, and especially if you're working on a project that's slow, that takes forever to synchronize. It's pretty much impossible in Revit to know which families are problematic, but with this, you get the key insight right away. All right, I hope this was useful. Looking forward to your feedback, and have a great day. Cheers.